everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my end of summer Oscar predictions for the upcoming Oscars in 2024. Now, the question on everyone's minds is, because of the writer's strike, because of the actor's strike, are the Oscars going to be pushed? This was a question that wasn't even considered when I made my last Oscar predictions video, and also because of the strikes, which films are going to be pushed out of contention. And we saw recently in the news a big one. Dune Part 2 is the latest to fall because of these strike pushes. So the entire landscape of my predictions has severely changed. The last time I did these predictions was A, before the Spider-Verse phenomenon, B, before the Barbenheimer phenomenon, and C, before the writers and actors strike pushed a lot of big titles, including Dune Part 2, to next year in 2024. So there's a big question of how this shakes up the Oscar race. And I wanted to do this now at the end of the summer, since we've gotten some big titles already coming out and some trailers and press and buzz for newer titles coming out. And because we're right on the brink of fall festival season. Venice is happening right now. We also have Telluride, TIFF, New York Film Festival, all these other festivals about to start as well in the upcoming weeks. So I wanted to get this out of there now, just so we can see how things change in another few weeks when all these festivals happen. As I've already mentioned a few times, there is a writers and actors strike going on right now. I am not a film promoter. I am not paid by any of these studios to promote any of these films. This is strictly film discussion and film criticism. But if you want to find out more about the strike, I implore you to check out the links provided down below to help you find out where you can donate, as well as just finding more information on what the strikes are and what is going on right now in Hollywood, and helping fight for actors, writers, and other very hardworking industry people to get the money they deserve for their work. Starting the predictions off with Best Picture, already you can see things have shifted around quite a bit. And that is because my number one last time, The Color Purple, is now all the way down at number 8. But I'm going to start here at my number 1 here. Oppenheimer. I want to put out a blanket disclaimer that this does not necessarily mean I think so-and-so film is more likely to win than so-and-so other film. This is more so about the nomination. This is in order of how confident I am in them getting nominated. And the top two, I think, are pretty clear. It's Oppenheimer and Barbie. Not only has it been such a craze, this double feature Oppenheimer-Barbie thing, but because Dune Part 2 is now no longer in the race, I think those are also going to be the big tech players of the year. Oppenheimer could pick up a sound award, definitely editing. Barbie can pick up production design, costume design. I think there's a good chance we see Oppenheimer and Barbie clean up a lot of awards come Oscar time, which is why I'm very confident that they will be at least in the top 10 when it comes to Oscar voting. Now, I think Oppenheimer actually does stand a real chance of actually winning, and I think Barbie, while I think it's a little bit further of a race to run in terms of getting the win, I think just by nature of being the biggest film of the year, being directed by an Oscar darling like Greta Gerwig, having this cast, having all those techs that it'll probably rack up, I really don't see a world where those two films are not part of the 10. And as I put in this little graphic, you can see how far away they were from the last time I ranked these. So Oppenheimer last time was number 5, Barbie last time was number 10. So Barbie's gone up 8 slots to number 2, Oppenheimer's gone up 4 spots all the way to number 1. Staying at number 3, though, is Killers of the Flower Moon. I think this is still a sure bet for a nomination. This is a film that has already screened at some festivals, even though it is not widely released yet to anyone. I think it's a very, very sure bet that at least it'll get a nomination, and I still think it could contend for the win. If the hype of Oppenheimer and Barbie starts to falter a bit, kind of like how the Power of the Dog hype kind of faltered a bit, and then Coda had that last-minute surge a few years ago, I think that could happen with Killers of the Flower Moon. I think it's lucky that there are some big high-profile films that came out earlier in the year. But even then, by Oscar time, Killers of the Flower Moon may start to dip a little bit in favor of winning that award. What I think could honestly sneak up and potentially be a contender to win is this number 4 film here, The Holdovers. It's a Focus Features film. This trailer dropped and it looks very old school, but it also looks very old school in the fact that it feels reminiscent of the Best Picture nominees of the 80s and 90s. It gave me a very Dead Poet Society-esque feel in the way the texture of the picture looked, in the way the kind of dialogue was written. Just from that trailer alone, it felt very old school, and I think a lot of the older viewers and voters of the Academy are going to really be drawn drawn to it. Plus, I think it's a real contender in a Best Actor category and a Best Supporting Actor category. And if you look at Alexander Payne's films themselves, he has had quite the track record in getting his films nominated, at least his post-Sideways films. I mean, Descendants was a Best Picture nominee and a contender to win that year. You also have Nebraska, which wasn't necessarily a contender to win, but was still a Best Picture nominee. The Holdovers is being said to be maybe his strongest since Sideways. And if two films since Sideways got him nominated for Best Picture, I don't see how The Holdovers doesn't. Past Lives has gone down a few slots, and I don't think this is anything to say about the quality of Past Lives or the support and love around it. It's only because it came out so early in the year that when Oppenheimer and Barbie came out, I feel like it kind of stole the thunder from Past Lives in a way. I still think Past Lives, what it has going for it is I think it's still a very, very strong contender for original screenplay, which we'll talk about later. And I think it's almost a surefire acting nomination contender as well. I think it's going to get at least one and maybe two acting nominations on a best day, 3. So I really think it's still in the mix as a potential nominee, though I think its certainty level has dipped quite a bit, but it's still in the top 5 here for good reason. And number 6 is The Zone of Interest, another A24 film. And that's why I kind of put these in the middle, because to get 2 films into Best Picture would be tough for A24. But in the past few years, the trend has been that at least one international nominee has gotten in every year. Last year was All Quiet on the Western Front. Famously, 2019 had Parasite in the mix. 2020 had Minari. 2021 had Drive My Car. So we start to see this trend that every year there's an international nominee. And just looking at the international nominees or the potential international nominees, I think The Zone of Interest fits that bill. It also kind of fits that kind of artsy slot that we see with like things like The Tree of Life or like Drive My Car, where it's a very specific niche group of people who are going to really dig it, and some people probably won't because it's going to be too slow, a little bit too artistic for them. But I think this just fits the bill in terms of what I think we always see in terms of an international nominee and a very artsy pick falling into here. This happens to cover both. The story, from what I've gathered, is about a family in Nazi Germany, but it's told kind of from a perspective of like looking at the Nazi in their everyday lives, and just kind of making a commentary that way. I don't know too much about it because I don't want to go into it knowing a lot, because I've heard it's a masterpiece. And the fact that it's being thrown around as a masterpiece right now makes me confident enough to throw it in the lineup and hope it sticks. At number 7, staying at number 7, is Maestro. This is a film that I think was strong when it first got announced. People thought it could even win. And then once the first test screenings came out, people were like, it's not that great. But now that it seems like they've re-edited it a little bit, we saw the trailer, I think people are now more on board, especially because it's going to be Netflix's most high-profile film. I think there's a good chance we're going to see Netflix in the lineup somewhere, and I think this is their safest bet. At number 8 is The Color Purple. Like I said, this was my number 1 last time because I really thought having all the producers behind it, like Steven Spielberg pushing this thing, having those really great acting performances, the fact that it is based on a musical that is based on a film that got so many Oscar nominations, this just felt like the most Oscar baity film of the year. The only thing is, with the strike now, I think it's going to be a little bit tougher for Warner Brothers to kind of push this, because you're not going to have all the actors able to kind of vouch for it and get it its eyes that it needs. And I think Warner Brothers is going to push Barbie way more because it knows that it doesn't need the actors. Barbie is going to be in the race because it's Barbie, not because of who the stars are necessarily. Whereas Color Purple, I think it could use some of those stars to campaign it. That being said, if the writer strike or actor strike ends before Oscar time, then I think Color Purple could find its way back up there, because it's going to have people like Fantasia, like Taraji P. Henson, like Daniel Brooks, like Coleman Domingo kind of behind it pushing the film. But now it's a little bit more of a question mark because of all those factors. At number 9, I have Anatomy of a Fall from Neon. This is, I think, half English language, which is why it could also kind of fit that international slot that I have The Zone of Interest filling. But this also feels like your Triangle of Sadness of the year, where it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It has a lot of fans. It may not be a contender to win. It may miss out on some big things, like maybe a BAFTA or maybe a PGA nomination, but at the end of the day, it still has enough passion to squeeze into the Oscar lineup. I think it has a contender for Best Actress as well amongst the mix, and it's a courtroom drama, and I think courtroom dramas themselves just do very well with the Oscars. I mean, a few years ago, Trial of the Chicago 7, which I think was a pretty below average courtroom drama, racked up a lot of nominations and was a contender for a lot of the year. So I think there's a good chance Anatomy of a Fall gets gets in. Also because Neon has a really good track record, and this seems to be the big film that Neon is pushing. If you look at this whole list, that is the only film right here that I have Neon campaigning for. So I think that's going to work in its favor, especially because Neon is not a struck company. So it has the ability to campaign its film. At number 10, though, we have Poor Things. And this is a spot lower than last time, but I think it's only because we added Zone of Interest and Anatomy of Fall to the mix. But Poor Things is something that when the trailer came out, I went, oh, this is so not the Academy's thing. It's going to be too weird, kind of like what everything Yorgos Lanthimos has done, except for The Favorite, where it's just way too out there for the Academy. Maybe it'll pick up a screenplay, maybe an acting nomination, but now that I've heard more buzz for it, I actually feel more and more confident that Poor Things will get a nomination, so much so that even after making this graphic now, I'm thinking maybe it should be higher than it is here at number 10. And the fact of the matter is, Searchlight itself is a big factor in this as well. We have not seen 3 years go by where Searchlight has not won Best Picture. It won Best Picture for Birdman, and then 3 years later won Best Picture for Shape of Water. 3 years later won Best Picture for Nomadland. And look where we are. After Nomadland, 3 years later, maybe Poor Things could be the winner that Searchlight hopes it can be. And I really would love to see a movie as out there conceptually as Poor Things get that recognition. Right outside at number 11, we have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which is 11 spots higher than I last had it. I had it very low in the last ranking, but it has become kind of this huge, massive success. And I think as soon as it came out and it got rave reviews and everyone loved it, I think it was looking like a sure thing for a Best Picture nomination. But a few weeks later, Barbenheimer. And I think that's the big question is, has Barbenheimer taken the heat away from Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse? This reminds me of what happened with Pinocchio last year, where everyone was like, oh my God, Guillermo del Toro made a masterpiece. It's going to be the first nominated animated film since Toy Story 3 and up. But I don't necessarily know if that's the case here again, just because so many films are going to come out after it. There's a reason we haven't seen it since Toy Story 3 and up, because it's a very difficult task to do, especially because of all the news that has come out about Phil Lord and Christopher Miller on the production side of it as well. I just don't quite know if it has enough juice to make the top 10, but if Maestro isn't a big hit amongst audiences, if Color Purple ends up being a box office bomb, if something like Zone of Interest is just too weird, then you can definitely see Spider-Man squeak in there, but I don't think it's going to squeak in there. I think it's going to have to be one of the most popular ballot choices to make it on there because it's an animated film, and it's just a trend we don't see too often. At number 12, I have Rustin. This is a little bit lower than last time, just because I think, again, this film is going to be all about the performance, less about the actual filmmaking itself. Then again, I said the same thing about Selma way back in 2014. I thought it was all about the performance and the message, not necessarily a Best Picture contender, and it got nominated for Best Picture. So I think Rustin could get in, especially if Maestro doesn't end up being the big Netflix push. We saw last year, Glass Onion was what Netflix wanted to campaign, and then a few weeks later, they kind of ditched that and went with All Quiet in the Western Front, and they made it in. So there could be a world, a universe where last minute they say, you know what, let's push Rustin instead of Maestro. And in that sense, I could see Netflix getting in with that. And also The Killer. The Killer is a potential one that could get in because Netflix decides that's the one they really want to push. Though The Killer, I'm a little less confident in, just because while it has been getting good buzz so far, people are describing it as like David Fincher's kind of Seven and Fight Club-esque era, when in actuality, those aren't the films that David Fincher got nominated for. David Fincher got nominated for Social Network and for Benjamin Button and for Mank. So the fact that they're comparing it to some of his non-Oscar-y titles makes me think it might not be an Oscar player. And then we have right sandwiched in the middle between those two Netflix players, Air, which is the Amazon, big Amazon player for the year. And I think Air still has a shot, but again, it's the Barbenheimer and Spider-Verse effect, where Air was kind of overshadowed by Spider-Verse, and then that was overshadowed by Barbenheimer, to where I don't know if Air is necessarily on a lot of people's minds, especially if it's not going to squeak into screenplay or not going to get that Viola Davis nomination. I think if it gets that Viola Davis nomination and the screenplay nomination, I think there's a chance it squeaks in at number 9 or 10 when we see it on Oscar morning. Napoleon Apple, this is also one that I had way lower on the list, but I think as some titles have dropped off and we look at what are the most Oscar baity titles here, if Ridley Scott knocks it out of the park with Napoleon, I could definitely see it making it on. The only thing is Killers of the Flower Moon seems to be Apple's big push. I also have May December here at number 16 for Netflix. This film looks like my thing. But I just don't know, just hearing the reviews about it. I've heard really good things, but I heard it's much different than people expect. And I think if it's a little more comedic and a little less Oscar baity, I think that could actually hurt it because it might be a little bit more divisive. And I think because Netflix has The Killer, Netflix has Rustin, Netflix has Maestro. They have a lot of films up for grabs this year, including Fair Play as well, which is not even on this list. So I don't know if May December will get in, though I am eyeing May December for some acting nominations. The Boy and the Heron's a big question mark because it's an animated film, just like Spider-Verse. But in a year where there's a lot of strikes going on, maybe this is the year for the Academy to do something different and nominate not one but two animated films. But even if they nominate an animated film, I think they're going to go with Spider-Verse before they go with Miyazaki's last film. And then we have Ferrari again. Michael Mann, hit or miss. I don't think Michael Mann has ever really been an Oscar player as much as he is popular within like the film Twitter community, so I'm not so sure about that. And then Saltburn is one that like I had in my 10 for a while, but then the first early reactions of Saltburn were not too positive, so I'm not having as much confidence in Saltburn. I think if Saltburn does have mixed reviews as it has looked like the past few days, I think Amazon's really going to go gung-ho with Air and not Saltburn because they know Air just has a more mass appeal, even though I mean Promising Young Woman was a little polarizing too. So there is still a world where Saltburn gets in if Emerald Fennell and company really, really push it. But here we see Dune Part 2, Blitz, and Challengers are all off the table. Blitz, Steve McQueen's newest film, will not come out this year. Neither will Challengers, which I thought could be like a sneaky pick to squeeze in there. So it definitely opened the field for a lot of things to happen here. Moving on to Best Director, I think because of the Oppenheimer praise, I think it's safe to say Christopher Nolan's a front runner right now to win. He's never won in this category. He's never won an Oscar, period. And I think this just feels like a moment for him where this could be awarding him not just for his magnum opus, which I believe is his best film and other people believe is his best film, but awarding him for a career and just being one of the most visionary filmmakers out there. You also have Martin Scorsese, though. I don't see a world where he doesn't get nominated either. The next three spots, though, are really kind of battling between a few different people, like 4 or 5 different names. I mean, obviously Denis Villeneuve for Dune was the big name that I had at number 3, but now that Denis out of the picture, who's going to fill that slot? I think we always see an international director in, which is why I have Jonathan Glazer number 3. Every single year, there's always an international director. Last year was Ruben Östlund for The Triangle of Sadness. The year before was Yamaguchi for Drive My Car. The year before that was Thomas Vinterberg for Another Round. We see every single year there's an international nominee, and I think this year Jonathan Glazer's Zone of Interest fits that bill. And then I also think just because of the nature of it being a contender for screenplay, I think Celine Song for Past Lives could get in, though I did kind of toy between her and Greta Gerwig, because I think the Academy's not going to make the mistake again of going a full year without nominating a woman in Best Director. It's just going to be a question of, do they go with Celine Song, do they go Greta Gerwig, or do they go Justin Triet for Anatomy of a Fall? Because if they go with her, that also fulfills the international director slot. So we could see a world where Jonathan Glazer and Celine Song both miss, and Justine Triet gets in for Anatomy of a Fall, along with maybe like a Yorgos Lanthimos or an Alexander Payne, or even a Greta Gerwig. I have Greta Gerwig just outside the 5, just because I think Barbie, while it's going to get a lot of texts and it's going to be a Best Picture nominee, I just don't know if they're going to think awarding the screenplay is awarding Greta Gerwig, so they're not going to go with her in director. This is a very crowded field because you also have Bradley Cooper in the mix, who was snubbed for A Star is Born, and I could also see a world where people are trying to right the wrong of snubbing Bradley Cooper for A Star is Born and give him the nominee here for Maestro. I think, though, if there is someone that Greta Gerwig can overtake, it's one of those last two, Celine Song or Bradley Cooper. But also look out for Alexander Payne. There have been some controversial things said about him specifically in his own personal life, but he has been nominated for a lot of films he's directed, including the ones I mentioned, The Descendants in Nebraska. So I think there is also a world where he gets in. Blitz for Color Purple, I am not as confident in now, especially with Warner Brothers being a struck studio. I just don't know how they're going to get the word out there for a first-time director like him to get in. And then Yorgos Lanthimos is on the rise for Poor Things. If we see The Color Purple, Maestro, even Zone of Interest, some of these films fall, I think we could see Yorgos Lanthimos sneak in for that 5th slot. But this is going to be one of the most competitive races to keep an eye on, especially with the amount of women who are in contention. I would love to see a world where 3 women get nominated. I'd love to see a world where it's Nolan and Scorsese, and then we have Celine Song, Greta Gerwig, and Justin Triet. I think that would be an amazing lineup. It's just a matter of, is Maestro going to hit? Are people going to think Cooper's overdue? Is Glazer going to get that international nominee? There's so many factors in play, but this is what I'm going with for now. Ask me in 3 weeks, and this is probably going to change. Moving on to Best Actor, I also have Cillian Murphy for Oppenheimer. Again, it's not necessarily who I think is going to win right now, but it's who I think is safest for a nomination. That's why I have Leonardo DiCaprio at 2. Do I think either of them are going to win? Probably not. I actually think there's a better chance that Bradley Cooper, Paul Giamatti, or Coleman Domingo win. But I think the top two, Cillian Murphy and Leonardo DiCaprio, are just safer bets because their movies are safer bets. Bradley Cooper has also taken a little bit of heat because of the prosthetic nose thing that has been in the news a little bit, though I don't think that's going to matter considering they gave it to Rami Malek for Bohemian Rhapsody. You know, they really love these big makeup transformations. Coleman Domingo, though, is someone who I really, really want to see win an Oscar, and I think could win an Oscar. If he gets into the category, I think there's a good chance he could win. But the question is going to be, is his movie seen by enough people? Is he a big enough draw for people to want to nominate? I could see Coleman Domingo being the Danielle Deadweiler of the season, who comes so close but doesn't get the nomination because not enough people saw his movie. But because Rustin is being put out by Netflix, I have real good confidence that he can get in. I actually think this 5 is pretty safe. It's just a question of which of these 5 is the front runner. Right now, I think Cillian Murphy, just by nature of Oppenheimer being the biggest film right now, it has the best chance of being the winner. But I really think any of these 5 guys, except for maybe Leo, only because Leo has recently gotten his Oscar. Leo's not like overdue for one, but any of the other 4 I could really see getting that Oscar. But TOU for Past Lives, if he's in Best Actor, I think it's a little bit harder of a field than if he were in Supporting Actor, but he is technically the Best Actor for Past Lives. But hey, all it takes is for Rustin or Maestro to flop, and TOU could sneak in just by Past Lives being a big contender. Barry Keoghan, I just think Saltburn is on a fall, so I just don't see him getting in if Saltburn doesn't get all those nominations. And then Kingsley Benadir, same thing. I think Bob Marley, One Love is looking a lot more generic after the trailer came out than we once thought it would. And then, of course, Joaquin Phoenix and Michael Fassbender, just by talent alone, could be in the mix for those films. So Best Actor, I think this is the one where the 5 feel right, and I really don't see where any of these guys would fall off unless their films themselves fall off. Best Actress, I still have Fantasia in there for Color Purple, even though I'm not so confident that Color Purple will get the Best Picture nomination. We've seen in the past that it doesn't really matter if you have a Best Picture nomination for Best Actress. We saw with Jessica Chastain for The Eyes of Tammy Faye, she won, and her film wasn't in the Best Picture category, so it doesn't really need to be a Best Picture contender for her to still win, because I think she's just going to be giving such amazing Oscar Beatty performance, and she's singing, and she's an American Idol alum. It's the same story that Jennifer Hudson had. Like, I think people are going to love that aspect of the story. She's someone that, even though the strikes are going on, I think she could still come through okay, even if her film isn't promoted as much, to where I'm still safe in the nomination. I don't necessarily think she'll win, but I think she's still safest for the nomination. Then Sandra Hüller for Anatomy of a Fall. After Cannes, she was the talk of the town, and I just don't see, after hearing all the buzz for that film, how that film could get nominated for picture and maybe even director and definitely screenplay without her coming along for the ride. Emma Stone for Poor Things, also a contender. If she didn't win a few years ago for La La Land, I'd put her at number 1, because I think this is a performance that I've been hearing so many great things about. She's essentially playing like a funnier, kind of twisted Frankenstein's monster, which I think is really amazing. And I think just by that nature, she's going to squeak in and could even contend for the lead, for the win. Greta Lee, again, for Past Lives. I don't see a world where you nominate Past Lives for picture, director, screenplay, and not for actress, considering so much of the film is on her shoulders. Though, because Past Lives has kind of slipped into the wayside the past few months, I don't know if she's number 1 anymore or even close to it, but she is in the top 4 still. And then Carey Mulligan. This was kind of a battle between Carey Mulligan, Margot Robbie, and Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman, I just don't see May December being as big of a contender, especially with this stacked actress category. I just don't know if she'll squeak in, especially because Netflix isn't going to be able to promote her. And same with Margot Robbie. She's the face of Barbie, yes, but I just don't know if so much of the buzz has been around Ryan Gosling in that film, where I don't know if any of the other actors are going to get that nomination, especially because, like I said, this is a crowded category. But because of the strike, if some of these actors like Fantasia or even Carey Mulligan or Natalie Portman aren't able to campaign, then that could be a good news for Margot Robbie, because I don't think Margot Robbie needs the campaigning for people to see Barbie, because everyone's seen Barbie. So I think she could stand a chance, but I ultimately settled on Carey Mulligan only because she came so close for Promising Young Woman. She's overdue, and I just feel like the fact that the trailer for Maestro came out and she was the top billed actress means she's going to have a much meatier role than I expected. It sounds like the film's going to be about her even more so than Bradley Cooper, and I think that's a good news for her and her Oscar chances. If they push her as the lead of that film, I think that gives it even more incentive for the Academy to nominate her. Because at first I was a little skeptical, saying, are they going to award Carey Mulligan for the Leonard Bernstein movie? But it seems like a lot of the movie is going to be from her POV and her story. So I feel even more confident about her getting in than I did last time, even though the arrow does show that she has dropped 3 spots. But always keep an eye on Annette Bening. She's an Oscar staple. She's still never won, even though I don't think Nyad's going to get a lot of eyes. Jodie Comer for the Bike Riders. Again, just depends on how the film does. If we're going to see an Andrea Riseborough of the season, I could see it being Tiana Taylor. Moving on to supporting actor, this is what I kind of alluded to when I talked about Margot Robbie, but Ryan Gosling seems to be the big push for Barbie. Robert Downey Jr. is obviously going to get a big push for Oppenheimer. I think it's going to be between the two of them for the win, but I am 99% sure that they will both be nominated. I just don't see a world, especially given the strike and given how other films may falter because of the strike. I just don't see a world where the two of them aren't solid because their movies are so big and so popular. Robert De Niro for Killers of the Flower Moon, though, he was a solid bet last time as well, and I think he's also going to be a solid bet here. I just don't see a world where he doesn't get nominated either. Those top 3 are really solid. It's really these next 2 slots where I'm not sure. John Magaro for Past Lives should get nominated. He's amazing in it, and I think a lot of people have been leaving that film thinking he's the best part of it. Now, here's a big question, and look at number 7. I do have TOU, who I had for number 6 for Best Actor. I have him at number 7 for Best Supporting Actor because I think if Past Lives, if A24 campaigns both of them in supporting actor, I could see John Magaro and TOU becoming double nominees for supporting actor for A24 for Past Lives. The only question is going to be, are they going to campaign him in lead or supporting? If he is campaigning lead, I think John Magaro has an easier path to supporting actor. But even if he's campaigning and supporting, I think there's a chance they both get in. But I still think John Magaro is kind of a surprising performance in that film that a lot of people are going to rally behind. And then while I have said that May December isn't necessarily a top contender for picture anymore, and I didn't even put Natalie Portman in my 5 for actress, I did put Charles Melton in my 5 for supporting actor because I think while Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore are the 2 big names of that movie, I still think Charles Melton has been getting most of the buzz when I've heard these early reviews for it. So I could see a world where he gets in and Natalie Portman doesn't. It would be weird, but I think because of the shallowness of this path, and this category, because it's so top heavy, I think there's some real spots up for grabs. And I think Charles Melton could get that. I think Coleman Domingo could be a potential nominee. The fact that he is so heavily predicted to be in for Best Actor for Rustin, I don't see Coleman Domingo pulling off the Scarlett Johansson and being nominated for 2 different films. Glenn Howerton was really a kind of a passion pick earlier in the year for a lot of people for Blackberry, and if that passion continues, we could definitely see him get in. Samuel L. Jackson for The Piano Lesson was the number 1 last time I did the rankings. I just don't think that movie's going to come out this year. There's no confirmation that it's not, but I just think if it comes out this year, then I'm going to put him back in my 5, and he may even win. But if it's not coming out, then I don't want to predict him here because I just don't see a world where The Piano Lesson with Samuel L. Jackson, Daniel Deadwyler, John David Washington, these 3 powerhouse performers, I don't see why they wouldn't tell us if it was coming out. I feel like we'd start to see trailers right now for it, and we haven't. So I just don't have confidence that that's going to come out. Best Supporting Actress, this one hasn't had a lot of changes from the last time. I think Lily Gladstone, Taraji P. Henson, and Danielle Brooks are still the top 3. Again, I've lost a little bit of confidence in The Color Purple overall, but I still think those 2 performances, having seen the Broadway musical, I can just tell you they're powerhouse roles, and if their actresses are as good as they seem, which, come on, it's Taraji P. Henson and Danielle Brooks, of course they're going to be great. I think that's undeniable. And then Lily Gladstone, obviously the number 1 contender. She's been number 1 contender since that movie was announced. I just don't see a world in which she's not the number 1 contender unless someone else wins the BAFTA or someone else wins the SAG. But even then, I think this is, if I had to put my money on a category to win right now, it's Lily Gladstone. Divine Joy Randolph has been getting a lot of good buzz for The Holdovers, especially if that film is in Best Picture and Paul Giamatti is a contender in Best Actor. I think she definitely comes along for the ride. And then Emily Blunt for Oppenheimer, just because I think a lot of people are going to have the Oppenheimer Barbie fever, and she's just another great performance in that movie to nominate. I did leave Julianne Moore out for the same reason I left Natalie Portman out. I just don't know if that film is not in Best Picture. I don't know if those 2 are going to get in, even though I put Charles Melton in there, which is just so weird, and I second guess it all the time. But Viola Davis for Air is also a potential nominee, but I think, again, she's been overshadowed. Her movie's been overshadowed by the Barbenheimer fever. But because of that Barbenheimer fever, I also have America Ferrera for Barbie as a potential nominee, as well as Jodie Foster for Nyad. Always a possibility just because people love her as a person and as an actress that she could get in. And then Carey Mulligan, because why not? Last time she worked with Emerald Fennell, she got in for Promising Young Woman. Here she's working with her again for Saltburn. Could happen. Moving on to the screenplays. Best Original Screenplay, Past Lives is still my number one. I think it's still going to be the script that most people are like, wow, that was so well written, so well done. And I think that's what keeps it as a Best Picture contender as well. The holdovers, though, Alexander Payne's screenplays always tend to get in, so I'm not poo-pooing that fact, and I think that's going to definitely happen. And then Anatomy of a Fall. It's a courtroom drama. There's a lot of dialogue in both English and in another language. I think that's going to be a big draw. And then Maestro and Rustin, they do get knocked a spot down because of Anatomy of a Fall, but I still think they're both pretty solid for a nomination if Netflix really does campaign the films well. Now, remember, there is a writer strike going on, but Netflix, the studio, can still campaign the movies. They just can't let the writers themselves speak about it because of the writer strike. So will that hurt Maestro and Rustin? I'm not sure. Same with Air. Air is just a film that I feel like has been losing a little bit of steam. A little bit of air has been left out of the balloon, if you will, not to use the title of the film against it. But yeah, I just don't know with this category. I think it's so top heavy with Past Lives, Holdovers, and Anatomy of a Fall, where the rest of those films are just kind of competing for those last few slots. But I think that top three is kind of going to stay the top three unless we get a big surprise and another film just kind of pops out of nowhere to snag that spot. Moving on to adapted screenplay, this is what I was saying earlier when I left Greta Gerwig off my director predictions. I think because she's going to be the front runner to win adapted screenplay for Barbie, I think because of that, she's not necessarily going to be a sure thing for a director nominee, though I'd love to see her get nominated in both fields. But adapted screenplay, just by looking at it, is a lot more stacked this year than an original is, because you have Scorsese for Killers of the Flower Moon, and then Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer. I mean, those are going to be two big films, but I feel like this is the one category where I think people are going to acknowledge the feminism and the message of Barbie over the kind of talky courtroom drama-esque nature of Oppenheimer, which is very strong. I think it's Christopher Nolan's best script ever. And then the messaging and the epic nature of Killers of the Flower Moon, though that is going to be one of the most intense three-way races of the Oscar season. This is going to be the category that I'm going to be most excited to see, because you also have Poor Things in the mix, which has been gaining momentum every single day. And then The Zone of Interest, which is supposed to be a little less flashy of a film, but is still going to have some great writing, because I've been hearing the word masterpiece thrown around. So this is going to be one of the most stacked categories, especially if you have Spider-Verse in the mix. There's a potential for that. I think if Spider-Verse gets this nomination, you guys can surely bet it'll get a Best Picture nomination. I don't see how it gets Best Picture without screenplay and maybe a few techs like score, sound, all those things. The Killer, David Fincher movies sometimes get in. Color Purple, not as confident because it is an adaptation of a musical, and musicals don't tend to do very well here. All of Us Strangers, a surprise festival darling from this early Venice buzz. And then Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. That's my selfish pick because that's what I want to get nominated here, even though I don't see it happening. The last category we're going to talk about today is animated feature, and I think this is pretty straightforward. It's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Of course, Miyazaki's last film, Boy and the Heron, could contend, and that was my number one last time we did these rankings, but I think just Spider-Verse has the more universal appeal, which I hate to say because, Miyazaki is one of the most influential directors of all time, but I just think for some reason, I just don't think Miyazaki's film is just going to get to that level that Spider-Verse is in terms of popularity and love and support. I think there's going to be a really devoted contingent of people who are going to go for Miyazaki, but I think ultimately the general mass appeal is going to go for Spider-Verse. Whether that be a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, we'll have to see when The Boy and the Heron comes out, because I think it will still be a tight race regardless, unless we see one of them in Best Picture. Like if Spider-Verse is in Best Picture, and the others aren't, then Spider-Verse is going to win. But I think TMNT, Mutant Mayhem, just a surprise hit of the summer for a lot of people. I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan, but I think because of the animation, because of the writing, I think a lot of people love it, and I see it getting in there, especially over some of the more disappointing films of the earlier half of the year, like Super Mario Bros. Movie or Elemental. Speaking of Elemental, I did squeeze it on, however, because I think in the weeks following Elemental's release, I think it's honestly gained favor to where a lot of people were like mixed on it when it came out, but then it's kind of gotten a little bit more traction as it's gone on. I have Chicken Run Donut the Nugget there. That's going to be the big Netflix push, but that fifth slot was really between Elemental and Wish. It's just going to be a matter of which Disney film gets in, and I think Wish, because of the writer's strike, Wish may not be promoted as well. I could see it going by the wayside like Strange World did last year, where it just doesn't get enough eyes because Disney doesn't market it well. And then Elemental, I think, just by people going back to the theaters and seeing it. I think it'll be on Disney Plus and be thriving on Disney Plus by the time these nominations come around. I just think Elemental has a little bit of an edge on Wish right now, but you can't count out the Disney princess movies, and Wish is that. It's just Frozen 2 didn't get in, and Wish, just by given the nature of the trailers, it feels like a Frozen 2, where it's like, here's our big song, but we're not really going to tell you much about the movie, just that there's this song about wishing, and I just don't know if that's going to cut it. But Nimona, another Netflix potential. I know a lot of people love it. I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to watch it soon, but like, it wasn't really a buzzed about hit on Netflix. Not a lot of people were talking about it, and I think a lot of people are going to be talking about Chicken Run, which is why I just think between the two Netflix films, Chicken Run just has a better shot. Can't count out the Super Mario Bros. Movie because of the budget and the returns on that budget and the popularity and how much people love that Peaches, Peaches, Peaches song, but is the Academy going to go for it? I don't know. They didn't go for Minions: The Rise of Gru, and to be honest, I think Minions of the Rise of Gru was actually not that bad, and they still passed on it, so we'll see. Robot Dreams and the first Slam Dunk, if they want to go for some more artsy films, Robot Dreams is produced by Neon. First Slam Dunk was in theaters a few weeks ago as a limited engagement. They could go for those if they want some more artsy picks, but I do think this category is a little more straightforward, just with Elemental and Wish kind of battling for that 5 slot. So there are my predictions for the big categories. I didn't talk about any of the text, honestly, because I had a doc all printed up, and then Dune got delayed. And instead of going through every single category and saying, well, instead of Dune, I'll put this film or this film or this film, I just figured, you know what, let me make a video on the big categories. And then after the festivals, then I'll do one last big nomination prediction video with all the text involved as well. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to check out more of what I do, check out the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. We have great videos coming out for you every week. So many different types of videos: Marvel videos, Big Brother videos, Oscar videos, movies that are so bad they're good. All those subjects are covered on the show, as well as the Dyl Pickle Podcast, where I'm counting down every single film on the Sight and Sound poll that was recently released at the end of last year, and where you can hear all these videos in audio form. If you want to take it on the go and don't have time to sit down and watch a video, I get it. These videos are long, so you can go listen to it in your car, listen to it on a jog. Who doesn't want to hear me yapping away in their ear while they're jogging after they drink their protein shakes and want to go exercise? They want to hear this little chubby man talking about Oscars. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all next time. Go support your actors, go support your writers, because they are what make movies happen.